thank you for the opportunity to come and have a chat this evening. Terry mentioned that she might fall. It just reminded me as I was walking up here, I don't mind having a lectern here, but I hate those temporary stages, because last year I was speaking at a very large function and the Prime Minister was there, the Premier was there, and a number of ministers were there, and I was introduced by a comedian of all people who did make quite a funny introduction, and then I was called up and I came up, and because it was a temporary dais that had one step, two steps, and the third step to the top was only half the size of the others, and so of course I wasn't watching where I was going, and I tripped over the top step and I cartwheeled across the stage, and there was nothing on the stage except a lectern. So I can see it in slow motion. Before I knew where I was lying on the stage with my arms around the lectern, which was lying next to me. So I stood and I tried to compose myself, and I thought there's only one way here, you just go on the attack. So everyone was fussing around me. I said, I said, now do I have your attention? So now that I've got your attention, I'd just like to talk about one of my passions. I guess everything I do, most of it is the same. Everything we do, we have a passion about doing things. Otherwise, I always believe we shouldn't be doing it. And whilst I'm involved in a lot of different activities, my real passion is children who are disadvantaged. Before I just talk to you a little bit about the history of Variety, the children's charity, I should just tell you how I became involved in Variety. 20 years ago this week, I was chairing a board meeting for a company called Skilled. It was then called Skilled Engineering. And the CEO said that the marketing director is coming in to do a presentation to the board. And she came in to talk to the board about an investment that Skilled was making from a marketing point of view, in what's called the Variety Bash. Now, many of you might have heard of what Variety does, and the word bashing isn't a good word to use these days in society, but a Variety Bash is where people get together and get old cars, more than 30 years old, and drive them across Australia to raise money for kids. And it's hugely successful, the fundraising. It's one of the best things I've ever done in my life. But so this woman came to the presentation, and she didn't need to, it was within the executive's delegation to spend this sort of money, but she thought she'd talk to the board about why she thought that Skilled should be investing in Variety. And one thing led to another, and the company went out and bought themselves a Volkswagen Beetle, a 1965 Volkswagen Beetle, and had it done up to effectively rally standards. And then, in a very clever move, the marketing director, she must be after a good bonus that year, she arranged for the directors in turns to drive this car off-road from Melbourne to Cairns. I got out of the car and being the chairman, I was silly enough to drive first, which means you're on the bitumen most of the way, you don't get all the fun on the dirt and across the desert. So I rang my wife when I got to somewhere, Broken Hill I think it was, that night. She said, how'd it go? I said, I've never had so much fun in all my life. And I'm not going to share this with anyone again. I'm going to go out and buy my own car. So I bought a Volkswagen Beetle as well, so that we had two, and I had Skilled sponsor it. And Skilled's logo is a hard hat, construction hat as was. So this little Volkswagen, beautiful little car, she had this huge yellow fiberglass construction hat on the top, and she had long red plaits, and she had a polka dot skirt on the running board, and she had ribbons on the red plaits, which were a polka dot, and she had a beautiful smile on the front, and she had eyes with eyelashes, and she could speak. She had a babe-style voice. So I did 11 bashes in that little Volkswagen Beetle, and it was only on the 11th bash that she let us down. As you probably know, they're very hardy little cars and very quick in the desert, great little machines out in the desert. And I just said it's one of the best things I've ever done in my life. I don't think it matters who you are and what you've done in life. It would be impossible to replicate the Variety Bash. And in those days, we'd have about 118 cars, crazy old cars set off like my car, and we'd drive off-road up to Cairns. And it'd be about 5,000 kilometres we'd do off-road. We might go to Cairns via Ayers Rock or somewhere. But that car did more than 50,000 kilometres off-road, and we had so much fun and we know that we were helping so many kids. So if that didn't force variety into my DNA, I don't know what would, and after all those wonderful nights in the bush. So I then joined the board in Victoria, I became the Australian chairman, and then I was appointed international vice president on the board in Los Angeles. Variety was an organisation that was established back in the 1920s, in the heady days of the 20s. 20s was the era where the world in the entertainment industry was bursting open. There was cinema, there was movie houses, there were dance halls, there was ice shows on ice, there were singers, there were dancers, there were people everywhere. So in 1927, in October 1927, a group of guys from various industries within the entertainment area got together as a group to talk about their industry, perhaps to have a few drinks or more drinks, to play cards, and to form a general group of friends within it. And because they came from so many industries, they called themselves Variety, and it became a club. On the 24th of December 1928, at 4 o'clock, a guy was clearing out a picture theatre in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, and it was called the Sheraton Theatre, and the Sheraton Theatre, and they found a baby. A baby had been left there, and a little note pinned to it, and the mum said, "This is I have 8 other children, I just can't possibly look after this child myself. Please, could you look after this child?" So as a result, this team of people, 11 of these guys who'd formed this club the previous year, decided that they would take responsibility for this little girl, and they called her Catherine Variety Sheridan. And they then oversaw her adoption to a family, and this made headlines right across the United States. Most major newspapers carried the headline of what happened. So they then started fundraising for her future, but it grew and grew and grew, and they used to meet at the William Penn Hotel, and they used to rent a small room like this. They held some fundraising events, and before they knew where they were, at an event they expected to have 180 people at, they had 1,100 people coming.
Oh, wow.
So this hotel has got a fabulous ballroom on the top floor. So they took the risk, decided to take that over, and because they were fun people, they arranged for a huge marquee to be established in this ballroom. And they had sawdust around, and they created a circus-type atmosphere. So today, and that was really the first Variety tent. Tent number 1 for Variety, the children's charity, is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And from that grew a charity that grew and grew and grew through the United States. A lot of people knew a lot about Variety, and it became the entertainers' charity. So all of the biggest names in entertainment, the Bob Hopes, US presidents, were all members of Variety, and it was a tremendously successful organisation. It then spread across to the UK and into parts of Europe, came to Australia and New Zealand, and it really blossomed and did tremendous work for so many children around the world. But then, like a lot of organisations, it started to lose its way. Why did it start to lose its way? It's like a lot of organisations, it's because of the leadership. It's because of the people involved. Organisations are only as successful as the people who strategise them, who manage them, and who operate them. And Variety Victoria is tent 77, so it gives you an idea of how many tents were operating by the time that Victoria was established as a tent. I joined the board in 2007, and at that stage we were down to 38 tents, operating tents. And it was really all about the management of the organisation, and there wasn't the vision, there weren't the people, and a lot of people who'd been involved in the past on the international board, without being too critical, came out of the entertainment industry, and most of them inherited their money. So they might have had one of the great famous names like Crosby or something, but they were a nephew or a niece, and they'd never actually run a business. So by the 80s, charitable organisations were becoming effectively a business. They needed to be run along business lines, and Variety had always been run as a club, very successfully as a club. So one of the first things we did was to say, okay, let's change the name. Because a club has the wrong connotations for everybody, for the people who are involved in the work and for the people who would support that work as well. So we changed the name to Variety, the children's charity. Then we started the process of developing a new strategy and setting up a better vision for what we were about. And we set our work that we wanted to do into three main categories. It was into what we call freedom, which is about mobility, which is about wheelchairs, it's about enabling kids to move around and get places. It's about caring, which is about life-saving medical equipment and services and infrastructure for children. And it's about the future. It's about children and their future in the world, whether it be education or whether it be other activities associated with their future in the world. We also restructured the organisation. At its height, there were 80 odd branches or tents around the world that were reporting into one office in New York with one person. And it's extremely difficult to manage a large organisation worldwide, to get uniformity of approach, to get accountability and transparency that you need with one person. So the first thing we did was to move the office out of New York and move it across to Los Angeles, right next to Hollywood, where it ought to be as part of the entertainers charity. We then restructured the business and set up regions. So we set up main regions of the world. We have a North American region, a South American region, an Asia Pacific region, and a European region, Africa, Middle East region. For my sins, I'm actually president of Variety Africa and the Middle East, and there's the challenge in itself. But I'm also the vice president of Variety Asia Pacific. So one of the things we've done is to not only to reinforce all of the tents around the world that were still operating and to build them with a different vision and focus for the future and to enable them to continue to raise money. And it's interesting, we've just moved to an new international website, but the last website that was up there was showing how many kids around the world we'd helped since 1928, and it was over 45 million. Over 45 million children in some way had been helped by Variety. It was about disadvantaged children, whether they be physically, mentally, socially or economically disadvantaged right around the world. But what had happened was the organisation had become very much an Anglo-Saxon based organisation. You know, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the US, Canada, other bits and pieces, Israel, Ireland, Jersey, Barbados, Japan, but we felt that, as we all know, the world's changed dramatically over the last 25 years. Today, throughout the Asia Pacific region in particular, and to some degree through South America, there is a tremendous growth of the middle class. People who in the past had no money today, for all sorts of reasons, have moved into a new middle class. They have money, but the interesting part about that is that it's actually increased the gap between the haves and the have-nots. So that gap's actually increased, but we've got a new group of people here in the middle classes who have got the capacity to be able to help those who are less fortunate. So another interesting thing about Variety is that it's different from most other children's charities in that money raised within a geographic location stays in that geographic location for kids in that area. So, for example, within Australia we have 7 tents from the 6 states of the Northern Territory. So money raised here in Victoria stays in Victoria for Victorian kids. And that's jealously guarded. In different states in the US, money raised in that state stays in that state. It's quite different to most of the other models for children's charities that are used, where money is moved from countries who are more affluent into developing countries around the world. So we've moved down the path. We've made a decision, and I've been working very hard to establish new tents. So in the last 12 months, I've established new tents in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and in Indonesia. And on Tuesday week, we have our opening ceremony dinner in Hong Kong. Very exciting. We've got an eminent board of people there. And it's another interesting part about it, it's probably no different to the council, is the board's only as good as the people who are on it and the quality of the people and the way in which they're led. And one of the difficulties I found was one of the reasons that the tents had gone down around the world was because they had the wrong sort of people on the boards. They were people with really well-meaning people, but they've never really run an organisation before. They didn't understand the challenges, the risks, and the opportunities. So what we did in Hong Kong was to start differently. We just started to have what I call a top-down approach. So I approached KPMG, who I do a lot of work with, to ask them if they would help us to do pro bono executive search for a board, an eminent board in Hong Kong. And my requirement was that 60% of the board had to be Hong Kong Chinese nationals. So we set about setting up a board very differently to the way it's been done anywhere else in the world. And we've ended up with an eminent board of people who, we have, for example, the leading paediatric psychiatrist in Hong Kong. We've got the medical superintendent of one of the major hospitals there. And we've got a leading lawyer, we've got leading people in a whole range of fields, social workers. And they're putting their reputations on the line to make this work. Their reputations are there and we're going to make it work. And it's a really exciting future in Hong Kong. In Jakarta, very different model. I wanted to set something up there. I didn't really know how to go about it. I had some business contacts. And my wife and I were at the men's Open tennis final, the Australian Open final in January last year, 2014. We were in the VIP suite and we were guests of Motorola. And one of their guests was in the corner, and I thought he was a Chinese guy, and he was left alone, his wife and daughter, and they weren't getting the proper attention. I didn't think about it for a while. So I went over and had a chat to them and got talking, and it turned out the guy is an Indonesian Chinese, and the 5th richest person in Indonesia, and a wonderful guy, and his wife and daughter, beautiful people. And I sat down to them and we talked about everything. We talked about variety. I talked about the kids, and all of a sudden we struck a chord. Daddy was a multi-billionaire who works right around the world, a hugely successful guy, but Mum and the daughter felt they wanted to do something with their lives. They wanted to be something as well. They wanted to make a contribution to society rather than just giving away Dad's money to charities. So, one thing's led to another, and the daughter now is what we call our chief barker, or our chairman of the board in Jakarta, and very successful operation. The company is paying for the CEO and the position. The company has paid all the legal costs for the setup of the charity. They're paying all the marketing costs, and we're, thank you. So it's a different model, and we're starting work there with the street kids in Jakarta. We're doing a joint venture with another charity that's already doing some work, and what I love about that is it's got potentially one of the best returns we can get, because as many of you would know, the street kids in these big cities are smart as anything. They're really smart kids. Many of them speak English already, or limited English already. All they need is an opportunity for education, clothing, a roof over their heads, and many of those kids could be anything. And so we're looking forward to that as a very successful operation. Kerry mentioned Istanbul, and again, we're looking at establishing a new operation, a similar model. I had the opportunity in November there to meet with a guy who turned out to be a terrific guy who flew me across in his private jet to see Gallipoli, which was a great experience. But he also has some daughters who are keen to set something up. So again, we're looking to set up a model there. There's just one catch that Daddy bought from a chain of handbag and shoe shops about 2 weeks before I arrived. So they're a little bit distracted on a few other things. But again, it's an interesting opportunity for us to move variety out of that purely Anglo-Saxon environment and to establish operations to help kids in countries right around the world. How do I go for time, Kerry? No clock. We'll just keep going.
Keep going.
Oh, thank you. So I think the important message is that Variety is no different to any other organisation. We want to do things to help other people, and we will do things to help other people, but unless we lead it, and unless we manage it properly, then it's not going to have the optimum benefit for the kids. And wherever we go around the world, it's heartwarming. Janet does more presentations than I've done, but whenever I've done a presentation for the kids, I've got tears in my eyes, because it's not just the kids. For example, if you're giving a presentation to a kid who is not able to speak and is not able to have use of their hands, and they operate a thing like an iPad with a stick in their mouth, and they type out with that stick the words they want to say. Now, not only does that enable that child to be able to communicate, equally importantly, it makes a huge difference to the whole family, to mum and dad and to the siblings. And that's where you really see it. That's where it really gets me, that opportunity to be doing something for kids, not just the kids, but it's a broader issue than that. And it's such a rewarding business to be involved with. And yet, for me, it's one of a number of things I do, but it's as you can hear when I talk, it's my passion. It's what we can do. So, what does that mean for all of us here? I think there's great opportunities. I always say to people, and I say to young graduates as well, you've got your whole life in front of you. You only get one go at life. So you've got to make the most of it. And one of the great things you can do is to make a contribution to the society in which you live, in which you work, in which you're friends. And I encourage every one of them to do something within their society, to do something to make a difference. Janet's always looking for people not only to become members of Variety in Victoria, but also to become volunteers and to attend our fundraising functions, to go on the bash. Now, if you want to go on the bash, come talk to me. I'll tell you about the bash. It is so much fun. It is so much fun. And one of the things about Variety, we always like to say, everything we do is fundraising with fun. We put the fun into fundraising, everything we do. It makes it really worthwhile. It's about like everything else in life. If you do a little bit of fun about it, and your job, your attitude with your family, your friends, it's fun, it's just so wonderful for everybody involved. Janet runs the biggest, one of the biggest children's Christmas parties I've ever seen. They run it down at Jeff's shed, and they have 5,000 children, 3,000 carers, and 700 volunteers in Jeff's shed for the most chaotic, amazing, fun-filled children's Christmas party you could ever see. So if anyone wanted to do any volunteer work for it, have a talk to Janet and do a little bit of volunteer work. But it's broader than that as well. There's opportunities for people. I mean, there's some people in this room I know probably who were not born in Australia. And there's opportunities for us to establish Variety's operations in other countries. We're always looking for really outstanding people to be directors on our boards, to make a contribution to the future. I like to say to my kids, whatever I do is volunteer. Whenever I travel, I stay anywhere. Variety doesn't even buy me a cup of coffee. Everything I do, I pay for myself. And I say to my 4 children, I'm spending your inheritance. But what I'm doing is, like a good businessman, I'm multiplying your inheritance from 4 to 4 million. And because what I'm seeking to do is to help 4 million children around the world, rather than just to help 4 children who are within the family. And my kids, pretty well, they've taken that pretty well. Yeah. So I just think that Variety, you can just Google Variety and you see it on the website. The websites are really very good. The Victorian one's a great website. But it is right around Australia, great operation in New Zealand. We have a series of programs that you could invest in, wills, bequests. We've got a whole range of things. Both Victoria and New Zealand run very good programs, which are a bit similar to the World Vision programs, except that all the money goes to the kids. And they are very successful programs. Victoria's got a scholarship program coming up next year for children in need. In New Zealand, a tremendous program for kids who are needy. 1 in 4 children in New Zealand is disadvantaged. The Prime Minister hates me saying that over there, but it's true. And so there's a lot of poverty in New Zealand, a great opportunity for Variety. So there are a lot of children's charities around. There are a lot of charities around. It's a very competitive business. But we think that Variety is the charity that makes a difference to children's lives. And it's something that, for the future of our world, the kids are our future. And unless we do everything we can for the children, particularly those who are disadvantaged, and there are so many in our community, Thank you for the opportunity to speak to them.